Check. 1, 2, 3.
The D.
Brief.
This is the D brief.
Go. Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's
Arts and entertainment scene.
This is the D.
Brief.
Welcome to the Debrief. I am your co-host. My name is Seth Ressler.
I'm Becky Scarcello.
And I'm Jag.
And it is Thursday, which means we have another in-depth interview today.
Spotlight.
Yeah, this is where we talk to somebody who's making things happen here in the city of Detroit.
And not to put pressure on her before we start, but I met this woman a week ago, and I was like, we have to have her on the podcast.
Yeah, there you go. This is a woman who's going to talk to us a lot about what's happened and the evolution of journalism here in the city of Detroit, because she's worked all over the place. She's worked for MLive, Huffington Post, when they first set up shop here, the Detroit Free Press, and now she's got her own email newsletter called Detour Detroit, and it's really kind of changing the model of how journalism works. So we're going to find out all about it. I want to welcome Ashley Woods, the founder of Detour Detroit. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Welcome. Tell us, as you look out over the Detroit landscape, what is going on in journalism? What are the big trends that you're seeing right now?
Well, I think, in some ways, what's happening in Detroit is happening everywhere, and then what is happening in Detroit is happening nowhere. And I feel like that is Detroit's story, no matter what we're talking about, right?
Right.
We do see that there are a lot of corporations with entrenched media properties here in Detroit, and they are arguing for dominance while also all of them are dealing with layoffs, declining budgets, a rapidly changing digital landscape that requires shifting priorities every 2 years or so. And it's tough. In that way, Detroit is still one of, I would say, the toughest journalism, landscapes, because there are so many different media properties that are battling for domination. I mean, we have 3 TV stations, 2 major newspapers. Cranes has really, stepped up their game recently. Sure. MLive is, a really strong digital-only property. And then you've got a whole host of interest or audience demographic publications underneath that. Right. It's actually pretty rare for a place of our size. At the same time, what makes Detroit really different is we are the city that came out of bankruptcy. All eyes are on us. We're a place of great investment and great opportunity. We are also perhaps at the risk of making the same mistakes that we made 50 or 60 years ago. And
always.
When you say making the same mistakes, you mean as a city or as journalists and as journalistic entities?
I think as a city, or as a region, I should say, as a region. I think that's much more fair. I think that Detroit right now is in a place where there is a lot of investment and a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of power being concentrated into a few hands. And we may be repeating the same mistakes over and over again, where power is concentrated into the hands of a few. The rest of people suffer. They rise up. They get angry. It repeats itself.
50 years ago.
Correct.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. And I think that is actually Detroit's question in the world right now is can we make a better city than the one that we almost lost?
Right. We've talked about this too, how we don't want to be in a place of desperation anymore, just begging people to come to the city and invest money. We're better than that now. And so, but like Amazon, we didn't get Amazon, and some people were so upset, but maybe it was a good thing because we weren't ready for Amazon. So that whole shift, who do you give the power to?
Well, and, there's a very interesting argument to be made. There's a woman I know, Rachel Perchetz, who's been in the city for a long time. Her husband owns Detroit City FC. And she wrote something really interesting on Facebook after Amazon, where she was like, instead of this, billions of dollars in subsidies, what if we gave, 10,000 entrepreneurs $1 million?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
And there are questions I think that deserve to be asked about where we think it's fair to allocate money or not. I don't think that makes me a communist or a socialist or anything. But I think we do deserve to ask those questions again. And to tie this back to journalism, our journalists actually have double duty of trying to reinvent and save an industry that is in dire straits while also trying to report on a city that is going through so much and stands for so much. And that is a tough job for anybody.
It's a very tough job, yeah. Now, what do you think, what sort of niche are you filling in that landscape?
So, when I started the Detour newsletter a couple months ago, I lived in the city for 12 years. And I always felt that a lot of the issues that I cared about or my neighbors cared about or people were talking about on Facebook threads or at city council meetings or whatever, they weren't always like fairly characterized in the media because the media was always speaking to this like mass audience.
Can you give any example of that, of something, of a topic that you felt wasn't given just coverage by the big boys in the media?
Yeah, like I mean, to talk about like one topic, I think that when people have tried to write about gentrification in the mass media, it always comes off as this like horrible, like, thing where like they're trying to take academic terms and it doesn't make sense, and it becomes this very simple two Detroit's dichotomy. And in reality, everything is more nuanced. But like, if you live, for most of these, major news organizations, heck, every day, like a large portion of their readers don't even live in Michigan, right? Like they're clicking on a story because they saw it on Facebook or on Google,
Right.
or like they still care about like the Wolverine score or whatever. And you're attempting to write about these issues, but not for a core audience that's living next to them every day. But you're also trying to do it for this mass market audience because you need a unique,
That big presence.
unique number, visitor number at the end to roll up.
Is that a function of the economics and just the model of how they make money, or what allows you to do something different?
Well, two things. I don't think the model is necessarily set in stone, but really large media companies have been very resistant to changing models, right? So the beautiful thing about something like Detour is I can really focus on an audience, which is people who either live in Detroit or care about the future of the city. Like really care about it. Like want to talk about like what it's going to look like 5 years from now and whether that's a good thing or not.
Like invested in it,
Yeah.
either spiritually or financially or whatever way.
Absolutely. And I don't have to worry about attracting the browsing audience of the, Wolverines reader from
Right.
Arizona. I don't need them to click on it to make any sort of like monthly revenue goal. And that's an incredibly freeing thing as someone for whom that was my former job.
I think that's
Right.
interesting as you go through this changing evolution of journalism. I know coming from the sports world, I know The Athletic is a subscription-based website that gives a lot of love to Detroit and some other cities when ESPN's worried about Boston and New York. And I think if you have somebody that, in your case, in an audience that's paid or not, if they're going to subscribe to a newsletter in their email, they have an active interest. It's not just something they're seeing scrolling through their Facebook feed. They have an active interest and they want to care about it, and that gives you more of a captive audience.
Well, and to tie this back to some of the research I did before I started the newsletter, I spent a lot of time talking to people who were influencers in social media. And it wasn't because like I was trying to figure out how to take a better selfie. Although, gosh, I just wish I could.
That would be nice. Yeah.
That's what Kim Kardashian
We
is
could
for.
use that research if you have any.
We
right? I don't
really,
know.
yeah.
But the core of that concept is really developing a following or like a micro audience, right? And for some of these people, like, they have a following of 40,000 people who they're a community and they have a discussion around those issues and they come back and forth and they trust that brand. And, L'Oreal or Squarespace or whatever is more likely to advertise to that micro community at this point than they are to buy like a banner ad campaign.
Sure.
And
Sure.
like, and I do think that is like, it is a changing reality of advertising that journalism has been slow to think about or try and respond to. And that's kind of my attempt now, is to say, can I build this kind of like micro audience locally and make it self-sufficient?
I know in a lot of the newspapers that I've talked to over the years, there's always this firewall between the writers and the reporters and the journalists and the sales side of the building. For example, a firewall that we don't necessarily see when we worked in commercial radio, right?
There was some a little bit though,
but not the way it is in a newsroom. Has that changed in the digital age?
It's changed somewhat, but journalism companies still put a lot of effort into keeping that firewall there. Sometimes it should be there, and sometimes it should not. Something I think that has been broken with local media for a while is the sense of like the right hand is doing something and the left hand has no idea, right? Like, I mean, if you were if you were like Patagonia or something, like the coat company wouldn't just be like churning out fleeces without ever like talking to like marketing about it or something, right? Like there comes to like a fundamental business point where like you have to make products for consumers, and there has to be some sense of like what the point of that is. And I think in some ways, journalism took the firewall so seriously, and for a while they had such a monopoly on between classifieds and advertising that they could just like tell the editorial team like go willy-nilly. But I'm not sure that's really intelligent. It still stands in a lot of places, and for some reason that is right. Something I've been working with at Detour, and I think a lot of other local or just media startup entrepreneurs are doing too, is trying to figure out when is the firewall appropriate. And when is it smart for us to think about the ways that a sponsor or an advertiser can be part about something without making it less true, without cheapening it, without making it something that causes us to lose trust with our readers? And to me, that's the benchmark, is I can't do anything that would cause me to lose trust with my readers.
And I think, Seth, to your point, that's why the wall is so much more strong in the journalism side, because in the radio side, we're in my case, I was talking about Katy Perry and Kesha.
Right,
it's not this
news.
threat of you're going to lose your journalistic credibility if you've got a sponsor and you're selling advertising.
But it does feel like we're in an age, and especially when you look at the backdrop of what's happening nationally, where the role of journalism in our society is changing, right? I mean, and people are questioning journalism, and there is there was this strict divergence between fact and opinion that you don't necessarily see anymore. I mean, how does that play out on a local level in terms of how you approach the city of Detroit?
Well, like I said, I think the first thing is transparency. We ran, our first ad campaign was with WeWork. Thank you, WeWork. We wrote hashtag ad at the top of it.
Nice.
And at the bottom of it too. We put it in a different color. And then I sent an email out to all my readers and told them that I did an ad campaign, and this is why, and this is what it means, and this is what they can expect.
Interesting.
Transparency.
Transparency.
That's great.
Yeah.
Because then you'll see it's an ad, and that's fine. I think in some ways, I will say, I think local media has been more protected from some of those issues than, like some of like the national groups. Like if you're an investigative reporter here in Detroit, like, I don't know, like Kleenex isn't asking to sponsor you. And that's like not like an ethical consideration. I think on a macro level, they are really struggling to do the journalism that they want and find enough of an audience of it to make sure those advertisers stay. In a world where those advertisers have more and more options for connecting with their audiences, sometimes without even needing a brand like the news or the Free Press, they can just go direct to consumer, right? So I think local in some way has been protected from some of the issues that we've seen in national, but at the same time, they have a lot more, I think, adapting to do.
Yeah. Ashley, can we take a step back? I'm really curious because I hear the passion in your voice and very much the frustration too of your past lives with this. Like, how did you get to this point to kind of have an epiphany? Like, I'm going to do my own thing, and then how did you make that happen? Because I'm sure it's not cheap or easy.
Is neither of those things.
Yeah.
I think to kind of go way back very briefly, I was an accidental journalist. I was at Wayne State, and I was working for the Lions, actually, in the administrative office at Ford Field. And I was working for my mom. My mom had worked in the suite levels my entire life, so had my aunt. And, I literally thought, that was what I was going to do with my life, because, that's how I grew up.
What you knew.
It's your normal,
what I knew.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was driving home, and there was a radio show from WBUR, the old On Point show, and I listened to it on the way home, and I called WDT, Detroit Public Radio, the next day, and asked them for a meeting, and I drove in and I begged them for an internship, and they just were like, yeah, if you want to like come waste your time and hang out, we're not going to pay you or anything.
Radio internships.
And I
Even when they pay you, they don't really pay you.
No,
There's a concert ticket if you're lucky.
some donuts.
and not in public radio, I didn't even get donuts.
Darn, granola bars,
Day
fruit.
old donuts, yeah.
I don't know. I really wanted to do it, but it was really hard. It took me years to break in. There were a number of years I spent working as a receptionist or selling steak sauce, or I put up flyers. I worked I got a real estate license. Like I was just hustling so hard. But the economy had crashed, and the first major round of layoffs had happened, and I just didn't ever think, I wanted it so badly, but it was so hard to get there.
Most people I know sold steak knives. You're the first person I know that sold steak sauce.
Yeah.
Well, the whole logic behind that was I couldn't afford food, so I took home the steak.
They don't give you the steak if you're selling the knives, but you need it if you're selling the sauce. See, that's that entrepreneurial spirit right from the jump.
This is what I'm talking about. Like, thank you, Gourmet Steak Sauce Company. You fed me for like a whole year. So to make a long story short, I got to the Free Press and the Detroit Free Press, and in a lot of ways, I was in my dream job. I was in charge of digital strategy and consumer experience for the entire organization. We were the largest, best newspaper in the state. We were older than the state of Michigan. I was and still am tremendously proud to have been there. I worked with some really amazing people. It really wasn't like I was frustrated with them, but I was, the joint operating agreement, the JOA between the Free Press and the News in some ways, it really particularly hamstrung what somebody like me could do. Somebody who was really interested in news and content, but also in revenue and events and in marketing. With the JOA, that is almost like not allowed to happen. And we were owned by a parent company that had shareholders, and those shareholders had to get paid every quarter by hook or by crook. And I think we made a lot of decisions on the corporate level that weren't the best for places like Detroit. So I was kind of in a dark night of the soul, and I was supposed to go out to DC for this conference one night. I stayed up the entire night. I couldn't sleep, and I actually prayed. I just said I got to figure out something to do, because I don't seem to be able to fix this, and I know what I want to do in my heart, and I can't do it here. And I got up in the morning, and I flew to DC, and I said my destiny is waiting for me in DC. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find it there. And I had a couple glasses of wine and submitted to this contest a few months before. It was a seed fund for new ideas and news. And I was in DC for a couple hours, and I got the phone call that I won.
Whoa.
Wow.
And that was the moment, because it's not like they were here's everything you need to build your company. They were here's $25,000.
That's it. Yeah, figure it
Hold
out.
on. What did you write on this piece of paper?
I know.
Shenanigans.
Could you dictate that?
In size 64 font,
Right.
shenanigans.
Yes.
I was like, look at all the things we could do. And it was an incredible opportunity, but this was my dream job, and that was $25,000, which was, most people, that's not enough to start a
something.
company.
Right.
Right.
No.
So I really was at this moment, what do I do
with this?
I don't know if I can make it work with this.
I'm going to invest it in Powerball tickets, and then that's what I would have done.
Done.
But yeah, then it was the curse of getting what you asked for in a way. But then,
Sure
now I
was.
have to do the work. Oh wow, how's this? Yeah,
Absolutely. If someone had been you want $250,000, I would have been all right.
of course,
That's a lot of steak sauce.
of course, yeah.
But yeah, it was a much more difficult decision, which, like you said, in a way, there's something actually poetic about it. I had to prove that I really wanted it. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if people who don't subscribe to the email newsletter yet, give us the pitch. Why?
Yeah. Why?
Give us your elevator pitch, Ashley.
You're busy and you have a life, and trying to find fellow local news is hard and complicated. So subscribe to the Detour Detroit newsletter. It's free. It's written by people like you. We believe in community.
So it's free to sign up.
Yes, it is.
And then what do you get? Because there's a paid model here too, right?
There's a membership function, which is actually something we're just rolling out now. So if you're free, the newsletter comes. That is great. Read it, share it. Our stories are on social, right? Like, so it's shareable beyond the email. But we really see like delivering you that news experience that's combination like informative and like, you know, helps you think, speaks to your soul, and then like makes you laugh. That is like our goal for every email, is to do that for you.
That's what I look for in friends.
Oh my gosh. Well, hi,
I think
I'm
you
Ashley.
just made a friend.
Yeah.
Oh, you should see the look we're giving each other right now. It's so adorable.
It's the power of painting a picture.
Yes.
You know, and I think not only are you covering stories that and giving it your unique take on stories that we may have heard in other places, but you're coming out with stories that we didn't know about. I mean, the example I use is just in the last week, I saw a story in your newsletter about these doctors that are going around and treating the homeless population in Detroit. I had no idea that was even a thing, but it was in my mailbox.
And they're university students. They're actually Wayne State University.
Part of their training.
And it's not, I mean, they're just doing it out of the goodness of their
It's just
heart.
a volunteer thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Wow,
Like,
I didn't know
because
that.
because when you're homeless, like, and you may have mental issues and you have no way of getting healthcare, like, you're not going to like run into, you know, DMC and be like, hey, where's my Hep A vaccine?
No.
So I think that's a really powerful story. Something else I thought, another, I think, kind of very detour story is we sat down with the makers of the documentary film Hamtramck USA. And we specifically talked about like the issues of democracy and immigration that were playing out in Hamtramck. And instead of making that one question in an article, that was the article. Because we really thought that was the most interesting part, and that our readers, people who go to Hamtramck and think about Hamtramck and like identify as Detroiters or as people who support about Detroit, they would be interested in 700 words about that.
Exactly.
Instead of 600 words about nonsense and one question.
Right.
When you look out at the arts and entertainment scene in the city today, you know, whether it's movies or music or sports, what are the stories that you're following that, you know, you find most interesting?
Would I like continue? So there's two kind of storylines that I think continue to think are fascinating in Detroit. One is the kind of like can-do DIY spirit in the ways that we're doing things that are incredibly unique, like the Sidewalk Festival.
Yeah.
Last week where you just have people doing, or the Hinterlands, like people doing incredibly avant-garde, interesting, futuristic work on a dime, on a sidewalk, or in an abandoned house.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I think there's like this like question is like, where is Detroit leading the world? And I think like we still have that aspect, whether it's in spoken word or music or in the performing arts, where, especially art, where we are leading people. I mean, graffiti has been a huge example of that. I think the other really interesting question is when you look at people like, say, Out to Death or Interstate Gallery, is you're seeing these Detroit artists who have managed to make a business out of what that they are doing and are trying to go to the next level. And that struggle of being from the Midwest and not having investment and not having those connections and trying to get to, you know, to the level of these artists that are living in New York or LA, and in some ways can take that for granted. And they haven't moved. They haven't left, right? Like they're still here trying to make it. And can they achieve success on their own terms? Like, to me, that is just endlessly fascinating.
I agree. I've been involved with Interstate Gallery from the beginning of the Mural Festival, and now to see Smithsonian Magazine just put out mural festivals in the world where you should go, and there was 6 of them, and Detroit's is one, and the only one in the U.S. So to see how they made that happen, it was so grassroots the first year, but they just grew and grew and grew, and that to me is absolutely incredible, because anybody can do certain things with a bunch of resources.
Right.
But it's a person that is scraping together and still has that collaborative spirit, which I think is very much still alive in Detroit, people helping each other, it's beautiful to see. It's inspiring.
So as you look ahead, I mean, because you've seen this evolution of journalism here in Detroit, I mean, make a prediction. Like, where do you think 5 years from now, or even 10 years from now, what do you think journalism is going to look like in this city?
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound like Swami or anything like that. But I think the reality is some of these major news organizations will get smaller before they get bigger. They have not fixed their model. And I think that the combination of technology and the ability to address fractured audiences by doing extremely detailed, targeted ad buys, whether that's through podcasts or Facebook or digital.
Sorry, say that one last one again.
Podcasts. Podcasts.
We just want to
You
make sure
should
everybody heard it.
advertise.
You got
the
that on tape,
debrief.
right?
The
Pizza,
debrief.
pizza.
I think you're actually going to see more of us because I think the last barrier to entry was like, 5 years ago it was like, okay, you've got a WordPress, but like, how are you going to monetize that? Right.
Yeah.
And I think now we are actually seeing solutions come. If I had a dream, like eventually I would be at a point where like I would have all of these amazing kind of like journalist people like doing their own thing. And like you could like walk into Ford and be like, listen, I got an amazing food writer who like connects with the Hispanic, community here, and an amazing hip hop writer who's really targeting, Detroit males ages 14 to 25 here.
Yeah.
Like let's do an ad buy for all of them. And I actually think that's going to be possible in a couple of years, is to be able to just do that, super fragmented, targeted advertising. And that allows people like us to make a living doing what we do.
Right.
That's what we're aiming for.
Go back to, you said the subscription service where there is the $30 a year.
Oh, yeah.
So what do people get for that?
So that's actually, so it's weird word choice. It's a membership and not subscription.
Oh,
Because the subscription is
got
free
it.
to the newsletter.
Absolutely.
Oh, right.
And the
Subscription
membership
is
is
free to the
$30.
newsletter.
So
Okay.
you're calling the membership. Right,
Yep.
right.
Because I really thought like, if we were doing something like, that was very real estate oriented or financial trading or something, I think it'd be very easy to do a closed system with subscription and make people pay to be a part of it. But it didn't feel right for me, for one,
Yeah.
because there's a ton of competition in local news.
Good point.
But then the other thing is also like, this is Detroit, and this is a place where people, we have a great disparity in wealth and income, and it really didn't feel right for me to put out a product that like you had to
Only
have a
certain
credit
people.
card and
Right.
$30 to be able, or $5 a month or whatever to be able to access. So like I wanted to make the access point as clear as possible. For membership, I think that we are looking for consumers who fit one of these two like habits or archetypes. The first one is like they've always thought journalism is kind of cool. But being a journalist is really hard. So like by being a member, they don't have to be a journalist, but we're going to have regular editorial meetings and they can attend. If they want to write an op-ed, they can write an op-ed and, we'll publish it. We're going to invite them to our Slack channel. So like they might say like, here's a really amazing link about murals in the market that I saw in Smithsonian.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw this, but you should put this in tomorrow's email. Right.
Nice.
And so the first group that we want to target is that I think like 5 to 10% of our readers who are like really interested in the future of journalism and want a low cost way to be able to be a part of it. But the second thing that I think we provide is, the ability to have some community. Like caring about the future of your city is actually a really amazing thing to have in common with somebody. And I think through whether it's happy hours or dinners or Q&As with people that we wrote stories about, or tours, or even a volunteer opportunity, I think that we can bring people together through that shared interest in local news and that shared concern for the future of Detroit. And I'm really excited about that because I actually do think that fills a really important need. And some people are just going to be happy getting the email and like living their own life. But like there's some people that want to be part of something. And I think in a really graceful way, it's not even that we're providing it to them, but we can help them shape that for all.
Yeah, that's some good bang for your buck, I would say. It's
Well,
an investment.
Many people have counseled me to charge a lot higher. But something that I really believe in is like you prove yourself first, So
agree.
right now it really does feel like a leap of faith for people to have in us. But we've grown pretty quickly in just a couple months. I mean, we're up to 2,000 readers now.
Congratulations.
That's
Thank
amazing.
you. We
Yeah.
have real revenue. We have, we were profitable last month, like barely.
Nice.
It's like not the kind of money you can retire on, but
No,
like,
but that's been a few
gotta make-
months.
you gotta
it
make
is real,
$1 before you can make $1 million.
So,
Yeah.
So I really hope that some people will just say like, it is worth it for me to spend $30 to ensure we have options in local news and ensure it's independent and not being controlled by shareholders who live in God knows where, right? Who are just about making an extra dollar off the stock.
The parallels that you've drawn here between the news industry and journalism and what Seth and I have seen in radio. I shouldn't speak for Seth here, but I know for me, as a former radio guy, I like what we're doing here with this podcasting thing so much better because there isn't a corporation dictating and where content is getting watered down and jobs are getting lost. And there's several companies that I worked for where I saw that. So I think that a lot of the same things are playing out across different types of media. So the comparisons you've drawn are really hit home for me.
Yeah, but now ask him about his paycheck.
Well, that's another story.
Paycheck, what's that?
Well, Ashley Woods, the founder of Detour Detroit, the email newsletter, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate you coming on. And if people want to subscribe, where do they go?
The easiest thing to do is just go to detourdetroiter.com. There's an ER at the end because apparently we have a lot of road construction. In
Couldn't get that URL, huh?
That URL is extremely expensive until I-75 gets fixed.
That's funny.
But you can find us on Facebook too. That's another really easy way to follow us. You can join our thousands of followers there. And and then get your next email. Join the team.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.